The trail stretched out before Daniel like a ribbon of silence, winding through tall pines that swayed gently in the late afternoon breeze. He walked with steady steps, his boots crunching against gravel, the weight of his pack pressing firmly against his shoulders. Hiking had always been his refuge, a place where the world's noise faded into the rhythm of his own breath. Yet today, the silence carried something heavier, an unease that had been growing for months. Back home, Michael waited. Michael, his husband of nearly 7 years, had been patient, dependable, and kind. But lately, Daniel found himself retreating behind invisible walls, unable to share what gnawed at him inside. Their conversations had dwindled to practicalities, grocery lists, weekend plans, household repairs. Affection had become routine rather than spontaneous. Daniel knew love still lingered between them, but it was buried beneath monotony. He wondered if marriage was meant to feel like endurance rather than connection. The path climbed upward, leading to an overlook where the valley stretched wide, bathed in golden light. Daniel paused there, drinking in the view, wishing the beauty could somehow reach the hollow space inside him. He wanted clarity, a spark, something to remind him of who he once was, before responsibilities dulled his edges. It was then he noticed movement on the trail below. A man emerged from the trees, striding with an easy confidence, his steps light, but assured. He carried only a small pack slung across his shoulder, as though the wilderness posed no challenge at all. Daniel watched as the man approached, the late sun catching in his hair, giving him a brightness that seemed almost deliberate. "Afternoon," the stranger said, his voice warm, carrying effortlessly across the still air. Daniel offered a nod. "Afternoon." The man stopped beside him, looking out at the valley. "Worth the climb, isn't it?" His smile was relaxed, unguarded, the kind that disarmed rather than demanded. Daniel found himself answering before he could think. "It is. Makes everything else seem smaller." The man extended a hand. "I'm Ethan." Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shook it. "Daniel." Ethan's grip was firm, his hand calloused, evidence of someone accustomed to movement and challenge. Their eyes met briefly, and in that glance Daniel felt a spark he couldn't easily dismiss. He shifted his pack, trying to ground himself. "You heading up toward the ridge?" Ethan asked. Daniel nodded. "That's the plan." "Mind if I join? Trails are always better with company." The suggestion was casual, without pressure, yet it unsettled Daniel more than it should have. He had come here to be alone, to untangle thoughts he could not share. But something in Ethan's tone, inviting without expectation, made refusal feel almost impolite. "Sure," Daniel said at last. They fell into step together. Ethan's stride was unhurried, yet purposeful, as though he knew how to match the rhythm of the forest. Conversation started lightly. Where they had traveled, what brought them to this trail? Ethan spoke of a love for spontaneity, of packing a bag without a plan and seeing where roads or rivers led. His stories carried a sense of freedom, untethered by obligation. Daniel listened, drawn in despite himself. He offered fragments of his own life, but avoided the full truth. He mentioned home without naming Michael, spoke of work without describing its weight. Yet, as Ethan spoke, Daniel felt something stir, an envy of the younger man's openness, a longing for that same ease within himself. The sun dipped lower, scattering amber light through the trees. Shadows lengthened, and the forest grew quieter. They reached a clearing where the air smelled of pine and damp earth. Ethan paused, dropping his pack. "Good spot to rest, don't you think?" Daniel agreed, though his restlessness remained. He sat beside Ethan, feeling the stillness stretch between them. It was not awkward, but charged in a way Daniel couldn't name. He tried to steady his breathing, reminding himself this was nothing, just company on a trail. When they resumed walking, the path narrowed, forcing them closer. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, brief touches that carried disproportionate weight. Daniel found himself acutely aware of the space between them, of how quickly it could vanish. By the time dusk settled, they decided to camp near the riverbank. The sound of running water masked the quiet of the woods, creating a gentle rhythm. Ethan built a small fire with practiced ease, while Daniel watched, oddly comforted by the glow. As night deepened, Daniel lay in his tent, listening to the crackle of fire and the low hum of Ethan's voice humming some unfamiliar tune. He should have felt calm, lulled by nature. Instead, his mind raced. A stranger had walked into his solitude, and already his thoughts bent toward him in ways they should not. He turned onto his side, staring at the fabric above him. It's harmless, he told himself. Just a fellow traveler, nothing more. Yet, in his chest, he knew the truth. He was drawn to Ethan, inexplicably and undeniably. And as the forest grew still, Daniel realized he was no longer hiking only to escape his life. He was hiking toward something he did not yet understand. Morning arrived slowly, the light slipping through branches and scattering across the riverbank. Daniel stirred, the damp chill of dawn clinging to his skin. He unzipped his tent and stepped into the pale brightness, breathing in the crisp air. Across the fire pit, Ethan was already awake, crouched over a small kettle balanced on stones. Steam curled upward, carrying the earthy scent of coffee. Morning, Ethan called, his voice still rough from sleep. Daniel rubbed his eyes, forcing a smile. You're efficient. Years of practice, Ethan said with a grin. He poured steaming liquid into 2 metal cups and handed one over. Their fingers brushed briefly, and the touch sent a quiet jolt through Daniel, too sharp for such a simple exchange. They drank in silence for a moment, the river's murmur filling the space. Daniel studied Ethan's profile, strong lines softened by the glow of dawn, eyes that seemed alive with mischief even in stillness. He tried to look away, but the image lingered stubbornly, making his chest tighten. As they packed, conversation unfolded easily. Ethan spoke of travels across Europe, sleeping in hostels, and wandering through cities without maps. His words painted pictures of freedom, of choosing roads not for their destinations, but for their detours. Daniel listened, captivated, his own life feeling suddenly small in comparison. He thought of Michael at home, predictable and steady, and guilt pricked at him for even entertaining the comparison. By mid-morning, the trail grew steeper, forcing them to slow. They paused beneath a rocky ledge to catch their breath. Ethan leaned back against the stone, eyes scanning the horizon. So, Daniel, he asked lightly, anyone waiting for you at home? The question hung in the air. Daniel hesitated, torn between honesty and concealment. Yes, he said at last carefully, my husband. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression held no judgment. And how's that going? Daniel exhaled, surprised by the weight of the question. He could have deflected, but something about Ethan's gaze, open, patient, pulled the truth from him. It's steady, comfortable, but sometimes it feels like comfort turned into distance, like we've stopped really seeing each other. The admission startled him, because he hadn't even voiced it aloud to Michael. Yet here he was, telling a man he had known less than a day. Ethan nodded slowly. That happens. Familiarity can blur the edges, makes you forget what fire feels like. Daniel's pulse quickened at the word fire. He tried to disguise the effect, but the air between them shifted. He sensed it, and judging by the way Ethan held his gaze, Ethan sensed it too. By noon, clouds gathered, the sky dimming to slate. When the rain came, it arrived hard and sudden, drenching them before they could react. Ethan grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward a shallow cave carved into the rock. Inside, the air was damp and cool, their clothes clinging to their skin. They laughed breathlessly, drops running down their faces. The laughter faded, replaced by silence that seemed louder than the storm outside. Their shoulders nearly touched in the narrow space, warmth radiating between them despite the chill. Ethan's hand brushed Daniel's, as if by accident, though the pause that followed proved otherwise. Daniel's throat tightened. He could have stepped back, could have drawn the line. Instead, he stayed, suspended in that charged stillness. Sorry, Ethan murmured, though his tone suggested anything but regret. Daniel shook his head, the word don't forming silently in his mind, yet never reaching his lips. When the rain eased, they emerged from the cave without speaking of what had passed between them. But Daniel carried the weight of it like a secret flame, burning in his chest. That night, as they lay in separate tents, Daniel stared at the ceiling of fabric above him, restless. Sleep came only in fragments, each dream pulling him toward Ethan's voice, Ethan's hand, Ethan's nearness. He woke in the dark, pulse racing, guilt clawing at him. He thought of Michael, loyal and constant, and the shame doubled. But alongside shame was a craving he could not name without betraying himself further. He turned onto his side, whispering into the silence, "This has to stop." Yet, when dawn light touched the horizon, Daniel knew he did not truly want it to. The forest awoke slowly, birdsong weaving through the thinning mist. Daniel stretched stiffly, his body aching from a restless night. The echo of dreams still clung to him. Ethan's smile, Ethan's touch, Ethan's nearness. Images that left his pulse unsteady even as reality pressed in. He packed his gear with deliberate slowness, hoping the simple ritual might quiet the storm inside. Ethan emerged moments later, hair tousled, a lightness in his step that contrasted sharply with Daniel's heaviness. "Ready?" he asked, as though the day held only promise. Daniel forced a nod. "Yeah, ready?" They set out together, boots striking rhythm on the damp earth. The trail wound upward, sunlight breaking through in fragments, scattering patterns across the ground. Conversation was lighter than the day before. Brief remarks about the terrain, the freshness of the air, but beneath the words lay a silence thick, with everything left unspoken. By midday, they reached a ridge where the valley spilled out in vast stretches of green and gold. Daniel paused to take it in, but beauty felt dangerous now. It magnified the ache inside him, the sense of standing on the edge of something he could not step back from. Ethan came to stand beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan turned, his voice quiet. "You don't have to keep pretending you don't feel it." Daniel's breath caught. He wanted to protest, deny, retreat. But Ethan's eyes held his, steady and unflinching, and the lie died on his tongue. "I can't," Daniel whispered. "I'm married." "I know," Ethan replied, "but that doesn't erase this." His hand lifted, tentative at first, then firm as it cupped Daniel's cheek. The touch was gentle, but its effect was devastating. Daniel's resolve wavered like thin glass under pressure. Every memory of Michael, loyal, patient Michael, fought to anchor him. Yet, in this moment, all Daniel felt was the fire Ethan had spoken of, burning where his defenses cracked. Their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, almost cautious, then deepened as restraint gave way to hunger. Daniel's body betrayed him, leaning in, answering with a desperation he had buried for too long. The world around them blurred, trees, sky, wind, all reduced to the gravity between two men standing at the precipice of choice. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel's chest heaved, guilt and desire colliding in a violent storm. "This shouldn't have happened," he murmured, though his trembling voice betrayed the truth. He didn't regret the feeling, only the consequence. Ethan's expression remained calm, unrepentant. Sometimes the heart doesn't care about rules. The words sank deep, unsettling yet undeniable. Daniel turned away, staring at the valley as though distance could erase what had just unfolded. But the taste of Ethan lingered, vivid and impossible to forget. They walked on in silence, each step carrying a weight Daniel could hardly bear. By the time they descended toward the trail's end, the air between them had changed, no longer charged with unspoken tension, but heavy with what had been crossed. At the final fork, where paths diverged toward different towns, they stopped. Ethan adjusted his pack, his smile softer now, touched with something like regret. "Guess this is where we part." Daniel nodded, throat tight. He wanted to say something meaningful to capture what this encounter had stirred, but the words refused him. All he managed was "take care." Ethan's eyes lingered on him for a heartbeat longer, then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods with a kind of effortless grace. Daniel stood alone, rooted to the spot, his chest aching with contradiction. He thought of Michael waiting at home, unaware of the fracture that now divided them. He thought of Ethan, already gone, yet alive in his veins like a pulse he could not silence. As the sun dipped low, Daniel began the long walk back, each step echoing with a truth he could never confess. He had gone into the wilderness seeking clarity, but what he found was something far more dangerous: desire unbound, and the knowledge that he was capable of betrayal. He tightened his grip on the straps of his pack, forcing his pace steady, as if rhythm alone could conceal the turmoil inside. Yet, no matter how far he walked, the memory followed: Ethan's hand, Ethan's voice, Ethan's kiss. And deep down, Daniel knew the trail had not only led him through the forest, it had led him across a line he could never uncross.